Good afternoon. This is the New Republic's daily video podcast. It's called Right Now, and I'm the host, Perry Bacon. I'm honored to be joined today by Geoffrey Skelley. He's a great political journalist. We overlapped and worked together, had a great time at 538 a few years ago. He's now at Decision Desk HQ doing a lot of data-informed election analysis. So, Geoffrey, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Perry.
Let me start with I'm going to talk mainly about New Jersey and Virginia, as everybody knows, having these big gubernatorial races, and Virginia also having House election races next week. So, start with New Jersey, where Mikie Sherrill is the favorite. Polls have her ahead by 5 or so. Talk about where that race stands, first of all.
Yeah, so actually in the Decision Desk HQ polling average, we have Cheryl up by about 6 percentage points right now. Take your polling average; it's somewhere 5 to 7, 4 to 8. Just sort of depends on the methodology of the given polling average. But yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a situation where Cheryl should be winning this election, if you will, in the sense of you've got Donald Trump in the White House, not terribly popular in New Jersey. And given sort of the backlash we tend to see in elections after the presidential race, Cheryl has a lot of sort of the environmental factors going for her. Now, it is true that Republican Jack Ciattarelli has been trying to connect Cheryl to Phil Murphy, who is the outgoing governor in Trenton, and Democrats in Trenton in general. And there's certainly a lot of dissatisfaction with things like the cost of living, utility rates, housing, all those sorts of things in New Jersey and in a lot of other places, of course. And Democrats have full control of the state government in New Jersey. So Ciattarelli at least has a case to make that Democrats have been doing a poor job in Trenton and that he would shake things up. But I don't think it's a coincidence that Cheryl's allies at the Democratic Governors Association have run an ad, for instance, that said said Ciattarelli wants to be Trump in Trenton.
Okay.
So there's a very clear effort here by Democrats to try to connect Ciattarelli to Trump as much as possible, and that was made easier by the fact that Ciattarelli had to sort of go out of his way to say supportive things about Trump, to make sure he had Trump's endorsement ahead of the Republican primary for this race. So he's sort of moved closer to Trump over time. But I guess it's also worth noting, and I'll let you ask something else in a second, but I know I've been going for a second. Ciattarelli in this position in part because he only narrowly lost 21 against Murphy when Murphy was seeking re-election by about 3
Jeff, you're,
percentage
you're
points.
coming in and out for some reason. Are you close to with some of the microphone? You're coming in and out. Sometimes it's very close, so sometimes I miss a word. Go ahead. Now, so good. Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll sit a little closer to the phone, maybe. So Ciattarelli only lost by 3 percentage points the 2021 gubernatorial election in New Jersey. And so, in theory at least, there is a path for him to win this thing. And so, given how close he came, and a lot of that's going to come down, we could talk about this, but him sort of maybe capitalizing on some of the gains that Trump made in New Jersey in 2024. But at the same time, Trump's in the White House, and that's going to make it tough for him.
So I guess we're in a more liberal magazine. So I mean, part of the thing that I've heard from people is they feel like, and I want to ask you about this, like, is the race is close. One view that I've heard is that maybe Mikie Sherrill is kind of a not very exciting candidate. Maybe she's, the way she won the primary, maybe there's still some African American communities that are not excited about turning out for her. That's one take that's sort of more candidate focused. The other is essentially that she's the incumbent in New Jersey, running the incumbent party that is kind of unpopular. That's my take tends to be that is like it's a closer race in part because she's running against Trump, but she's sort of the incumbent in New Jersey, and that's a barrier. But where do you see her? I think the question is why is she not winning by double digits? And to me, the answer is because the incumbent governor is not popular is probably the 80% of it. But I wanted to figure out what's your view about is she a bad candidate, quote unquote.
I think you always have to be careful about sort of saying someone is particularly a bad candidate or a good
Right.
candidate. I think they have to really do things to to really pass like a certain threshold to truly qualify as bad.
Right.
But I will say that I think Sherrill's had some sort of stumbles in this campaign that might say something about her candidacy, or about maybe how much she's been tested as a candidate since getting elected to the U.S. House. I think there is a line of thinking that she won an open seat in 2018 to get a historically Republican seat, but one that was trending blue in 2018, and then she hasn't really had a close race since then. And so, in that sense, maybe she hasn't been tested all that much on the campaign trail. And so now, in a competitive gubernatorial election, she has found herself facing a bit more in the way of tests in terms of when you're, in front of a camera, and when you're dealing with people asking you questions, and sometimes tough questions, and sometimes not tough questions. There was a notable moment earlier in this campaign where she was essentially asked, like, "What's the first thing you're going to do as governor?" And she just had basically like this terrible word salad answer. And Schiaparelli even ran an ad basically just showing that entire clip. And sort of like, what is Cheryl, like, what is her purpose? What is she running to do? What is she trying to do? And I think that probably hasn't helped her.
Hmm.
At the same time, she has a very impressive biography, former Naval Academy graduate, was a helicopter pilot in the Navy. Like she certainly has like lots of things going for her, but I think there's sort of question marks about like, okay, but what does she actually want to do when she's governor? That when you're separating that out from like the biography discussion, like Schiaparelli talks about what he wants to do, but at the same time, his problem is that he's a Republican running with Donald Trump in the White House, and it's easier now than ever to link him to Donald Trump. So in that sense, I think it's Steve Kornacki said something to me the other day on my podcast where he was like, people have basically said to me that Sherrill is trying to lose the race by losing the campaign, but she'll still win the election. And that's maybe down to some of the fundamentals. But getting at what you were saying, I do think dissatisfaction with what's happening in Trenton and the state capitol under Phil Murphy's leadership is definitely a factor here, and an opening for Ciattarelli. Like, look, if Donald Trump had lost the 2024 presidential election and Kamala Harris for president right now, I think Jack Ciattarelli would probably be in a really great position to
Yeah,
win
so
this
trying
race,
to get
because
it. Yeah.
he wouldn't be answering questions about Trump all the time in the same way, or it would be a lot harder to, I think, make that stick as much, and there'd be just an opening there for Ciattarelli that we saw him sort of almost take advantage of in 2021 when he only narrowly lost. So I guess that, like, basically what I'm saying is I think you can say both of those factors are playing into it. I'm not sure what you would say more. Like, I suspect, though, that fundamentals of the White House, but Phil Murphy and Democrats controlling things in Trenton and having controlled things in Trenton for 8 years now is a thing that is helping Chiarelli, to be sure. So it's not all down to Cheryl necessarily struggling.
So 2024, Trump did better in New Jersey than 2020. I think better than 2016 as well. So you mentioned gains. So is two questions for we leave New Jersey. One is how is the Mondani close by factor playing any harm is definite, or the comparisons of her being more charismatic, him being more charismatic than her. How's that playing out is one. And then second question would be about New Jersey moved to the right a little bit. And do we think that's permanent or that was sort of temporary?
With discussion of Mom Donnie, and I don't think it's having a particularly large impact
Okay.
on the New
That's,
Jersey
that's fine.
race.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely think that Republicans would like it to make a bigger effect.
Right.
I think they
Yeah.
they want to talk about Mom Donnie. I think that's pretty clear from conversations you see
Yes.
among Republicans, that they view Mom Donnie as a potential asset politically because
Yes.
he seems
He's so
he,
close, but this New Jersey's so close by. It's more relevant than in Kansas, though, or in Ohio. Yeah.
right, exactly. But I don't think at the end of the day that that's having a particularly large
Okay.
effect on the New Jersey race. I think what is potentially a bigger factor is the swings that we saw in 2024. And so the question that you asked was like, sort of, is this like, was this kind of a one-off thing? I suspect that if you sort of look at what's going on politically in the places that shifted most particularly to the right in New Jersey. Now, most of the state shifted to the right, but that was true across most of the country. Most of the country shifted to the right. So it's sort of like, well, what were the places that shifted a lot more to the right? and places that shifted a lot less, maybe to the right than we saw on average or saw nationally. And the places that shifted a lot more in New Jersey were places that are historically very democratic, have much larger populations of people of color, working class, blue collar communities, denser, more urban areas of the state that historically have been very democratic. A place like Paterson, New Jersey, for instance, shifted like 30 points to the right by margin. It still voted Democratic.
Okay.
This is a place that's like 65% Hispanic. It still voted Democratic by a good margin, but it was not nearly as blue as
I
it
see.
had been. And so you saw that a lot in North Jersey in particular in the 2024 election. And that's part of the reason why you went from a situation where Joe Biden carried the state by like 16 points in 2020 to Kamala Harris only carrying it by 6. And that was a 10-point swing in margin. And that was the second biggest swing to the right. Only New York had a bigger swing to the right, 10.5 points from 2020 to 2024. Now, you are talking about like a better year for Democrats in 2024 and obviously a better year for Republicans a better year for Democrats in 2020 versus a better year for Republicans in 2024. So like there's a lot of moving parts here, but it's not a coincidence, I think, that you saw evidence of Trump doing better among people of color nationally, especially Latino voters, and then very much so in a lot of communities in New Jersey that check check those boxes in terms of the makeup and sort of the constituencies there. Now the question for the Sherrill Chitterelli race is, can Chitterelli capitalize on that to some extent, win over some of those voters? Because I think there's also a discussion. Look, we see big shifts like this, and we know that Trump in particular had a major appeal among a lot of voters who are inconsistent voters, less engaged voters. In a 2025 gubernatorial election that's going to clearly have a lower turnout, is Chitterelli going to be able to turn out some of those more marginal voters who may have come out and supported Trump, but may not show up for a 2025 gubernatorial race? Because at the same time, Chitterelli in 2021 did really well in a lot of sort of maybe more traditionally conservative Republican places, or places where Republicans have traditionally done better. Suburbs, exurbs of New Jersey. He did a lot better than Trump did in those places in 2020. Like comparing 2021 and 2024, Trump way back in some places that Chitterelli did a lot better in, and maybe that's just because Chitterelli is just he's just not as Trumpy. Even with Trump's support, he doesn't come across to that extent. So
Right.
MAGA in particular may have a kind of a negative appeal in some more affluent suburban areas of New Jersey.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, can Chitterelli somehow combine appeal with what Trump did? And if he did, you can definitely get to a path to victory for him. But I'm not sure it's actually feasible that he will pull that off.
Let's go to Virginia. So Spanberger ahead, 8 to 10 is what I've seen. What do you all have as the average right now?
Yeah, right now she's up by about 8 percentage points in our polling average. I will say that polls have definitely disagreed to some extent on sort of, is this race like a 6-point race, a 7-point race, or is it a 12-point race? But I think, at the end of the day, it would be very surprising if Spanberger lost. I think that's sort of where things stand. It's the likely Democratic race at the top of the ticket. And honestly, Winsome Earl Sears, the Republican lieutenant governor who's running against Spanberger for governor, she may have just lost the day that Trump won the presidency
Okay.
in Virginia. I mean, Virginia, actually, what's interesting is with New Jersey shifting to the right, it and Virginia had about the same margin in 2024, about 6 percentage points. And I think about the 2021 gubernatorial election that Glenn Youngkin, the current Republican incumbent, won. And we should say right here that Virginia is the only state in the country that does not permit elected governors to seek immediate reelection, which is why Youngkin is not running right now. This race would be very interesting if even more interesting, and I suspect very tight, if Youngkin were running for reelection or could run for reelection. But considering Youngkin won by about 2 percentage points in 2021 with Biden in office, and Virginia has had this historical pattern of shifting against the president's party consistently in every
Right.
gubernatorial election since going back to at least 1977. It has shifted at least somewhat against the president's party. Now in 2013, you did get a rare case. Got the only case where the president's party actually won the governorship in that time span where Terry McAuliffe won in 2013, but very narrowly. and they're kind of a special set of conditions, maybe. But nonetheless, the state still moved to the right somewhat with Barack
Yeah.
Obama in the White House. And so I think knowing that Youngkin only won by 2 points in 2021, and knowing that the state went for Kamala Harris by about 6 percentage points, if it moved at all to the left, it was going to be really hard for Winsome Earl Sears, the
Yes.
Republican, to win. And so that it's not, none of this is obviously a given candidate. Quality and ability is going to go into this some degree, like how well you can actually take advantage of these conditions that we tend to see, and how unpopular Trump actually is and whatnot. But Trump isn't popular in Virginia. That's continued to be the case, and so I think that was going to make it really hard for Earl Sears. And then on top of that, Spanberger has fundraised very impressively, has done done all the things she needed to do to put herself in a position to win. And there's been talk that Earl Sears is not a particularly great candidate in terms of her work on the campaign trail, and again, how much do those things matter? I don't want to overplay them, but I do think that in that situation where you need to sort of alter some fundamental dynamics in the electoral environment, you need to be a particularly special candidate, or you need your opponent to do a bunch of things wrong, and that hasn't really worked out for Earl Sears at this point.
So let me drill down here. So I guess just watching this from afar, my impression has been that the Democrats have a strong candidate and the Republicans, we have a weak one. But if the margin is 6 or 8, that's kind of, I guess, if Youngkin were running against Spanberger would be ahead by 4. Is that what we think? Because what are we looking at here? Is like Virginia's leans to the left slightly, but yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. Youngkin, in polling of this race that has asked about his approval or favorability, has tended to be somewhat above water, net
okay,
positive
all right,
territory, even while Trump has polled net
okay,
negative on approval or favorability. So, in that sense, I think Youngkin would definitely have a chance. I think a
yeah,
Spanberger Youngkin race would have been a
close one,
really,
okay,
really impressive contest. That would have been something. At the same time, maybe Spanberger wouldn't have decided to run. She might have been like, "Well, I'll
yeah.
just hang out in my congressional district
In
a
part,
little
he's an
while longer."
incumbent, so that's not a fair question. Like,
Yeah,
I guess is Spanberger better than the generic Democrat? Is what I'm trying to ask. Let me ask you that way. Yeah,
yeah, and I think perhaps, I mean, I think there's a good chance that she is going to. I mean, she's leading the ticket and is probably going to win by more if Democrats win the lieutenant governor's race, and then we can talk about the attorney general's race for a minute if you want
yeah,
to, because
yeah,
that's actually really the most interesting contest now in Virginia. But Spanberger, all signs point to her sort of leading the ticket in terms of her margin of victory. Ghazala Hashmi, who's the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor, leads by about 4 percentage points in our polling average.
okay,
And different polls have shown her ahead by it's either somewhat close to 3 percentage points, or maybe she's ahead by almost as much as Spanberger is ahead in some of these polls that have had Spanberger up by 10 or so. So I think the thing to remember with Virginia, though, is in recent elections, basically since 2009, you've almost always seen those 3 statewide races, the 3 statewide offices in Virginia, the results run very close together generally.
yeah,
So if Spanberger is winning by 10 at the top of the ticket, I would expect Hashmi to not be too far away, for instance. Now, I might not have expected Jay Jones to be that far away, who's the Democratic nominee for Attorney General, running against now incumbents for other offices in Virginia can seek reelection, which is a little confusing. But incumbent Attorney General Jason Miyares, the Republican there, he is seeking reelection. And maybe because he was an incumbent and was outraising Jones, maybe he was always going to run stronger than any of the other Republicans on the ticket. However, because of this texting scandal that Jay Jones has gotten caught up with, he's had some other things too, but
yeah,
in particular, the revelation that he had these series of texts and conversations in 2022 where he talked. I mean, it was hypothetical, but nonetheless, he said very like openly in this conversation with a Republican state legislator. By the way, not the most brilliant move on his part. If you're, I mean, besides even the content,
yeah,
what are you doing, my guy? Very dumb. He's texting about like a hypothetical where he shoots and kills the then Republican Speaker of the State House of Delegates. I mean, just really just out of bounds kind of stuff. Just very, very off-putting. And in this particular moment, when obviously in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, political violence is very much top of mind for people as a concern, and just for this to all come out at this moment, I think was particularly, bad for Jones politically and really good for Miyares. And in the aftermath of that, we have seen Miyares lead in the polls in this race. Is it enough for him to win? We'll see. I think there is definitely a path for Jones to sort of get carried across by a favorable environment for Democrats, a favorable, if Spanberger is winning by like 9 or 10 at the top of the ticket, I could see Jones winning by 1 or 2 points. Like that could absolutely happen. That there's just not enough ticket splitting in this day and age for Miyares to pull it out. But if it is more that Spanberger by 7-6 kind of environment, then maybe Miyares does pull it off and does get a split ticket result, which hasn't happened in Virginia for the 3 statewide races since 2005. So the Attorney General's race is actually the one that I think people are most closely following because of the Jones texting scandal and the opportunity that this has given to Miyares.
Let me conclude by talking about redistricting in Virginia. The Virginia legislature is taking, which is controlled by Democrats, is taking some early steps to maybe, I'll use a reverse, gerrymander their districts in a way. The current Virginia delegation is 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. They're looking potentially at making it basically 9-2, 8-3. What I want to ask you about, though, is the broader picture. I'm having a hard time figuring out where we are because I don't think I've seen a good analysis about where we are generally. Like in a normal environment, Trump's approval is like in the low 40s. I think the Democrats would be favored to win the House. Has enough changes in redistricting happening to where we can't say that anymore, or the Republicans are the favorites, or do we have a good sense of like how many seats the Republicans have sort of won by redistricting right now, or how much of an advantage they've gained by redistricting?
So right now, the two big stories are California and Texas,
Yes.
and they may roughly cancel out, assuming. I mean, look, it looks like California voters are probably going to pass Proposition 50, and if they do, the Democrats will get the map they wanted, and that will position them to perhaps cancel out the gains that Republicans are going to make in Texas, 4-5 seats, basically. Okay. From there, Missouri, they're going to gain a seat unless that map gets halted by a referendum campaign, which is also a possibility. I would say at this particular moment, Republicans have positioned themselves to perhaps gain a little bit more, and it sounds like Indiana may also pursue redistricting, and North Carolina just made a move, which will gain them a seat. Republicans 1 seat there. So at this point, like I think Republicans have edged ahead slightly in terms of the net gains that they could get from this process. However, I don't think it's enough at this point to at all guarantee them continued control of the House. If thinking about like where things are right now, based on the current makeup of districts, roughly 20 I think would automatically be in the conversation is in play for Democrats to target. And that's like maybe even a conservative estimate in a midterm environment where sometimes you can have some cases where a seat might seemingly be a little too far in one direction, but maybe whatever the perfect conditions come about like, in 2018, Democrats flipped a seat in Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, like for instance, that was a little farther afield than I think people expected to have happen, even in a pro-democratic environment. But if you're thinking about roughly 20 seats where either leaned slightly to the left of the country, 2024 presidential election, but Republicans held on to it. So like Harris carried it, but by slightly less than the overall margin, or sorry, Trump carried it, but by slightly less than his national 1.5 point margin, or Trump carried it narrowly and it was just like a hair to the right of the country. Those are the kinds of seats that are going to be in play in an environment where I do expect Democrats, in terms of the overall environment, to have at least some advantage. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that advantage will be yet, but at least some advantage. Just like Republicans had at least a small advantage in 2022, maybe not as big as one as we might have expected, but there were a lot of things going into that, with obviously the Supreme Court and the ruling regarding Roe v. Wade that I think kind of shifted the balance of where that electoral environment was. But Republicans still had at least a small advantage in the overall political environment in 2022. So if Democrats have at least a small political advantage in the environment in 2026, I would expect Democrats to at least get some of those seats, and they only need 3 right now.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that's going to change with the redistricting math being incorporated or whatnot. But if you're talking about a situation where Democrats might be able to win 15 to 20 seats,
I see.
you're going to need more to change, I
I
think,
see. Okay.
to really guarantee Republicans a shot at holding on. And this is not to say that that won't happen, because it definitely could. Like, this is, especially there's all this conversation about the Voting Rights Act, the
Yes.
court making decisions on that. That would really
Okay.
made a decision on that. It could really open the door to a much larger set of changes in
Okay.
the South.
Okay. Interesting. I think we'll wrap there. That's a good, because I think that's where I'm looking. That's the next thing is like that
Yeah.
if they rewrite the Voting Rights Act, then we're talking about a lot of seats. Okay, that's a good thing. So Jeff Skelley, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Perry, thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.